On this Tuesday night, historic injustices, historic reparations.
This is the largest settlement in Canadian history.
Ottawa's $40 billion compensation deal for Indigenous children harmed by the child welfare system.
We needed the Canadian public to awaken to the injustices.
Code Orange.
We are facing unprecedented challenges.
The intensifying COVID crisis at 2 Ontario hospitals. Stranded overnight, the highway that's turned into a parking lot for hundreds.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After years of failing to act, the federal government today released details of an agreement to compensate First Nations children and their families harmed by the underfunding of the child welfare system on reserves. Tens of thousands of children who were removed from their homes, forced into foster care, often move multiple times, losing connection to their families and culture and leading to a legacy of loss and harm. It is the largest class action settlement in Canadian history, worth $40 billion. It will be split into $20 billion for compensation and $20 billion for long-term reform of the on-reserve child welfare system. It means the government is finally obeying a landmark 2016 decision by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which found the federal government has for years been discriminating against Indigenous children. This is not a final deal. It still needs approval, but it's hoped money will be distributed before the end of 2022. David Akin has our top story tonight on the deal and the reaction.
This historic settlement of $40 billion has been a long time coming.
It has been decades, in fact, in the making, but an agreement in principle now exists to provide billions in compensation for the harm done to tens of thousands of First Nations kids removed from their home and placed in foster care, and billions more to prevent such harm from ever happening again.
For the first time, math and science will dictate the numbers. This is what it costs to deliver child and family services in our communities.
Ottawa will pay out at least $40,000 and possibly more to an estimated 110,000 First Nations children and their families removed from their home anytime after 1991 up until now and placed in foster care.
This wasn't and isn't about parenting. It's in fact about poverty and First Nations children being removed from their families and communities instead of being provided help with food, clothing, or shelter.
Similar payments of at least $40,000 will also be made to the estimated 60,000 First Nations children who had medical treatment denied or delayed because of federal-provincial squabbling over who should pay for that care.
And no amount of money will ever be the right amount, nor will it bring back a childhood lost. But today is about acknowledgement, about being seen and heard.
Payment details will be worked out over the months ahead, and while all parties hope to have the checks sent out by the end of this year, one of the advocates who started the lawsuits will be watching closely to make sure this agreement in principle, still subject to court approval, becomes a done deal.
We owe it to the survivors and the youth in care and the families who were told their kid wasn't worth the money to see this thing through to completion.
Ottawa also set aside close to $20 billion additional dollars over the next 5 years to improve child welfare services in First Nations communities. Much of that money is expected to be used to build new housing.
That it's not just good for Indigenous people, it's good for the country, the future of this country, when every single person has a fair chance to succeed.
Now, even as Ottawa puts this case behind it, there are other legal matters involving Indigenous plaintiffs still outstanding, including a suit by 105 First Nations who seek compensation for harm done to their entire communities by the residential school system. Donna?
All right, David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. Well, for years, the federal government argued in court it had no duty to compensate First Nations families or children who were harmed by the discriminatory child welfare system. The lead plaintiff in the first national class action lawsuit to challenge that was Xavier Mouchoum, an Algonquin from the Lac-Simon Anishinaabe Nation in Quebec. Today, his lawyer honored him.
I'd like to say a special word about the young man whose name is attached to this historic case, Xavier Mouchoum in English. When he was 9 years old, he was removed from his family for reasons which he still does not know and placed into foster care. From the age of 9 until 18, Xavier was transferred to 14 different foster homes. He was placed and he was removed from 14 different foster homes. He lost his native Algonquin language, his culture, and his ties to the Lac-Simon community. Xavier trusted us to tell his story in the hope that this lawsuit would help change a discriminatory system and provide financial support to the children who suffered under it.
Now to the pandemic and the impact of the Omicron variant. More than 11,000 new cases were confirmed in Ontario today. And as Ontarians prepare for sweeping new restrictions that come into force tomorrow, Toronto's mayor is planning for a worst-case scenario, anticipating the peak of the Omicron wave is still 4 to 6 weeks away.
I want people to know we are laser focused on making sure that the essential and critical city services that residents rely on continue to be delivered.
The healthcare system throughout the Greater Toronto Area is already feeling the strain. 2 hospitals have moved to code orange, both because of rising cases, but also a shortage of staff who have tested positive and stayed home. As Jamie Mauracher explains, that will impact all patients, not just those with COVID.
Inside this Brampton, Ontario hospital, it can feel like Omicron is everywhere. It's causing widespread staffing shortages and a sharp increase in COVID patients. For a system already shorthanded, it's now a crisis.
I think it is the single most important issue that is facing the healthcare system in Ontario at the moment.
It's forced Brampton Civic Hospital and Etobicoke General to call a code orange. Under the emergency measure, staff will be redeployed, emergent care will be prioritized, and patients will be transferred elsewhere.
A code orange is a call to action not only for the hospital and the healthcare workers, but really for the community at large.
An urgent call to mask up, keep your distance, and get necessary second and third doses. But no precaution is perfect, and no hospital is immune. Todd Ellis is a nurse at a Toronto trauma center and says his ER too is dangerously shorthanded.
We have limited resources to isolate people. And so you're seeing patients that are potentially COVID that are not being isolated because we just simply don't have the room.
In Quebec, COVID-related staff shortages have officials preparing for the worst as well.
In the next 2 weeks, most surgeries are going to be canceled. Most clinics are going to be canceled. We're talking about closing some emergency department, the ambulatory sites.
A hospital northeast of Edmonton already made the move to suspend labor and delivery services. And in Manitoba, where COVID hospitalizations are surging, the lack of frontline nurses forced the temporary closure of 2 northern hospitals.
There's no question. The patients who don't have COVID are also going to feel the effects of a very strained healthcare system.
Strain that's always been there, further exposed by the pandemic. It's a problem that affects every Canadian, but one with no immediate solution as Omicron's impact deepens. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joined the ranks of Canadians who have had a booster dose of vaccine. Trudeau flashed a thumbs up after getting his 3rd shot today. He urged Canadians to do the same, though access to boosters varies depending on where you live. Boosters are a key to how we're going to get through the next year with COVID. Evidence is emerging in other countries that suggests the dramatic spike in Omicron cases could quickly burn itself out. As Eric Sorensen explains, some health experts believe Omicron may be the turning point to downgrading COVID from a pandemic to a virus that's endemic.
Bianca Garibaldi and thousands of other Canadians have braved long lines and frigid weather as Omicron spreads both the virus and a sense of urgency across the country.
It's a little cold, but it's worth it to try to get a booster.
Our numbers are rising, our ICUs are filling up, and it is absolutely critical that we protect ourselves and each other.
As COVID case numbers rise, hospitalizations are edging upwards. But looking ahead, there are signs of better days to come. Omicron variant has indeed spread quickly and exponentially. The risk of overwhelming our healthcare system is real. However, as more Canadians contract Omicron and get over it, along with increased protection from booster vaccines, it could result in a wall of immunity that we have not produced up to now. This wave has risen faster than any other, but if it peaks then comes down, perhaps within weeks, the large waves of this pandemic could be more manageable, the virus eventually becoming endemic, something we live with like other viruses.
This will be the game changer. The concerns that we had before, that we have big waves that overwhelm the healthcare system, should not be there anymore, at least not to the same extent. Rather than waves, we will have ripples.
Omicron became dominant in Denmark before Christmas. Yet that country's chief epidemiologist now suggests the virus could subside there in 2 months. The economy faces another bruising winter, but some businesses are looking ahead. One U.S. airline is confident air travel will bounce back by this summer.
COVID is now endemic. We're getting better as a society at dealing with it, accepting it, and figuring out how to manage and live our lives safely.
This winter will be difficult. More restrictions, more illness, more deaths. But Omicron may be the right formula to see our way out of it.
By producing a mild disease with lower mortality, by being much more transmissible than other variants, thereby outcompeting them, it's moving itself into potentially becoming an endemic virus.
There is still reason to worry about new variants emerging, but as society's immunity builds naturally and with vaccines, there is reason for optimism too. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Another new variant with multiple mutations has been discovered in France, though the World Health Organization today downplayed the threat from it. French scientists say it was detected last month in 12 people living near the southern city of Marseille. They claim the first case was linked to a person who had recently traveled from Cameroon. The variant has 46 mutations, raising concerns it could be more transmissible, possibly more resistant to vaccines. The findings, though, have not been peer-reviewed, and the WHO monitors multiple variants. It's investigating this one, but has not declared it a variant of concern. In the U.S., it took nearly 4 months after the novel coronavirus first emerged for that country to record 1 million cases. Now it's reporting that many in a single day. More than 1,082,000 new cases were reported Monday, the first time any country has reported a daily count that high. It's more than double the 7-day rolling average in the U.S. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control says Omicron accounts for 94.5% of cases, and hospitalizations are slowly rising too. In China, it only took 3 confirmed cases of COVID-19 to impose a total lockdown on a second city. More than 1 million people in Yuzhou are under orders not to leave home. All 3 cases were asymptomatic. Local officials say the source of the infection is unknown, but there could be more. And the city of Xi'an, about 500 kilometers to the west, went into lockdown nearly 2 weeks ago. Its 13 million residents are banned from leaving their homes and even need verified proof of a negative test before seeking medical services at hospitals. China has a zero COVID policy, and it's trying to contain Omicron ahead of the 2022 Winter Olympics, which get underway in Beijing in 1 month. She was once the darling of Silicon Valley. Coming up, the dramatic downfall of Elizabeth Holmes. Plus, the criminal charge former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo no longer faces. Well, the first year of the pandemic wasn't a bad one for Canada's wealthiest CEOs. In 2020, they had their second best year ever. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says the average pay for Canada's top 100 CEOs at publicly traded companies was $10.9 million in 2020. That's up $95,000 from 2019. More than 82% of the average came through bonuses, including cash and stock options. And about 1/3 of CEOs who got bonuses in 2020 worked for companies which received government aid, such as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Canada's top CEOs made 191 times more than the average worker in 2020. And as a final kicker, the report says by noon today, they will have already earned what the average Canadian makes all year. The conviction of Elizabeth Holmes, former CEO of Theranos, is a stunning fall from grace. After a 3-month trial, a jury found her guilty on 4 counts of fraud. And she has gone from being famous as the world's youngest self-made woman billionaire to being remembered for massively defrauding investors. Jackson Prosco reports.
Plan to appeal?
She was once one of the most sought-after figures in Silicon Valley. On Monday, Elizabeth Holmes left court convicted of fraud.
I believe the individual is the answer to the challenges of healthcare.
As CEO of Theranos, the company she founded at age 19, Holmes promised to revolutionize medicine with technology that could test for hundreds of health problems with the prick of a finger and a few drops of blood, faster than traditional lab tests at a fraction of the price.
Every time you create something new, there should be questions. And to me, that's a sign that you've actually done something that is transformative. How are you doing?
Skeptics quickly turned into investors, won over by who they thought was the next tech prophet, like Apple's Steve Jobs, right down to the black turtleneck.
She is this charismatic, young college dropout. She's a woman in a world that is dominated by male CEOs.
Billionaires like Rupert Murdoch and national chains like Safeway and Walgreens all bought in. At one point, Theranos became valued at nearly $10 billion.
People were drawn in by both her and by her promises to change the world in a way that wasn't just building an app or a social network. It was actually supposed to do something transformative.
There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. The house of cards came crashing down when Holmes was indicted in 2018. During her trial, Holmes testified in her own defense. The jury heard evidence that sealed her fate.
There was an investor call that was taped where she was making statements, representations that turned out to be false.
Holmes now faces the prospect of decades in prison. Her ex-boyfriend, Theranos president Sunny Balwani, faces his own trial on charges of fraud. From the ashes of Theranos has come a reckoning for tech speculators, a lesson that the next big thing must first be proven, or it may turn out to be nothing at all. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Ahead, a dangerous U.S. storm leaves hundreds of drivers stuck in the snow. This freeway in the U.S. state of Virginia is still a mess. Emergency crews have been working to get drivers off Interstate 95, where hundreds were stuck since Monday. The biggest snowstorm to hit the mid-Atlantic U.S. in years upended the commute of thousands, stranding drivers in temperatures around -8 degrees Celsius. The problems began Monday morning with a crash involving 6 tractor trailers about 90 kilometers south of Washington, D.C. Virginia Senator Tim Kaine was among those stuck for 27 hours in what is normally a 2-hour drive to D.C. He said all he had was an orange and a Dr. Pepper. Many people were without food and water. Some ran out of gas. Over 30 centimeters of snow caused power outages and downed trees, and parts of the I-95 are still closed. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo won't face criminal prosecution over an allegation he groped an aide. The district attorney in Albany says the accuser is credible, but that there's not enough evidence to bring the case to court. Cuomo, who was due to face the charge in court on Friday, has denied the allegations. He resigned as governor in August after public pressure related to multiple misconduct claims. A New York Attorney General's report found he had sexually harassed 11 women. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Fairmont Chateau Laurier Hotel in Ottawa, which first opened back in 1912. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.